All right, well, I'm Jessica Wegener, and I am the dietitian here at the Health and Wellness Center. So I'm here to talk to you guys about food. Yay, that's fun stuff. Okay, so the outline that we're going to be going through for the class today is we're going to start off first just talking about the specific nutrition recommendations for the different diagnoses. So trying to lower those lipids, lower triglycerides, and lowering blood pressure. We're going to go over some special or specific foods related to cholesterol. Just briefly go over label reading, talk a little bit about food choices, and then eating out at restaurants, and then a kind of a brief overview on some keys to success as well. But before we go any further, I'm just going to pause for a second. And you know, a lot of times I come and I teach this class, and I try to put myself in your shoes, and I'm thinking that you're probably thinking, what does this young, well, I like to consider myself young, dietitian know about high lipids or hypertension, heart disease, etc.? Well, it actually hits really close to home for me because both of my grandparents died from heart disease. My uncle had his first heart attack at 38. My mother had her first heart attack at 48. And then 2 years later, she had 5 bypasses done. My brother was put on lipid medication at the age of 25. So this is, you know, really close to my heart. And this is a lot of what I talk about today are things that I actually practice in our home because genetically I am set up for some you know, difficult times heart-wise if I don't make changes now. So, you know, just so you guys understand that what I'm preaching to you guys is things that I actually practice in my own home. So, all right, so let's get started. First, we're going to talk about hypertension. And so the first thing with hypertension is to follow the DASH diet. So the next slide, we're going to go through what exactly is the DASH diet. What does that mean? The second thing with hypertension is to really focus on that sodium intake. If we can get that down to 1,500 milligrams a day, that's amazing. I mean, that's just our ultimate goal when it comes to that sodium intake. You know, the recommendation is 1,500 to 2,300, but like I said, the 1,500 is that ultimate goal. Throughout all the different talks that we're going through, you're going to hear me mention maintaining a healthy weight, and that's for any chronic disease. We're looking at that healthy weight. Even if it's just losing 5 or 10% will make a significant change in your blood levels. Then we look at alcohol for hypertension. We want women to have less than 1 drink per day and men to have less than 2. And then what we've seen is if you can implement the DASH diet, really pay attention to that sodium, maintain a healthy weight, and lower your alcohol intake, we can see that change in blood pressure within 14 days. So it can be pretty quick changes if we follow these recommendations. So this is the DASH diet. It is a diet that's going to be a little bit higher in fruits and vegetables, 3 to 4 cups per day, and a little bit higher in our whole grains. It's going to be lower in our meat. Really what it's saying is 6 ounces, less than 6 ounces per day. So this little chicken breast right here is 3 ounces. So think about that, just 2 of these little servings per day of meat. Most of the guys laugh at me when I show them this because it's tiny, especially compared to what we sell in our grocery stores. I mean, the chicken breasts in the grocery store are probably 2 or 3 times this size. So we're going to get into portions a little bit more as we go, but just so you can kind of see what that looks like when it comes to those meats. The dairy products, 2 to 3 servings a day is actual recommendation for people, anybody, not necessarily just on the DASH diet, but that's a pretty standard recommendation. We're looking for the low fat and the fat-free dairy products. Nuts, seeds, and beans, 4 to 5 servings per week. The reason that we don't have specific measurements on there is because they all have different serving sizes. Beans have a different serving size than nuts and seeds. So that's why it says that servings. And the way you find those servings is looking at the nutrition facts label. It'll tell you. Fats and oils, 2 to 3 servings per day. So fats and oils, depending on what kind you're using, will depend on that serving size. So salad dressings, we're looking at 1 to 2 tablespoons. When we're looking at our butter and our oils, it's teaspoon. So just so you can kind of get a visual of what that looks like. All right, and then the last one is to have less than 5 sweets per day. Most people have 1 or 2 desserts a day. So less than 5 per week is what we're recommending for that. So that is those recommendations. So talking about specifically looking at salt and our sodium intake, we can see from this slide that most of it comes from our processed and prepackaged foods. And when we add it at the table with the nice little salt shaker or during cooking. So we can make a pretty big dent in our sodium intake by changing 3 things. What we put on our foods when we cook and eliminating those prepackaged foods. So does anybody have any ideas? What are some things that we can use instead of sodium to flavor our foods? Tabasco sauce, okay. Does anybody know? I don't know the sodium content of Tabasco. Is it pretty high? Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure. That's one I actually don't know. I'm not a big Tabasco consumer.
But you don't use that much of it. So.
Okay, right. So there's usually a drop or 2 when it comes to that. How about anybody else? Any other? Go ahead. Say that again. Yes, exactly. Mrs. Dash would be a great product to use. The other thing you can do is just fresh herbs, garlic, onion. I mean, those are low in sodium, but actually add a lot of flavor to your foods as well. MSG, because it has sodium, monosodium glutamate. Right, it's not as much, but it has sodium in it. Okay, so these are some of the words that we're trying to stay away from when we're looking at whether it's menus or picking out foods from the grocery store. These are some of the terms that are going to indicate to us that these are products that are higher in sodium content. So anything smoked, pickled, barbecue sauces, marinades, soups, broths, a lot of Asian foods. Cheese has high sodium, especially some of our hard cheeses like the Parmesan. And there's the MSG that you would mention, and then canned products. Most of our canned and a lot of our frozen foods are going to be high in that sodium as well. So those are the ones that maybe you don't have a nutrition facts label available, but you can at least kind of eliminate just by looking at avoiding some of these terms when we're choosing the food products. Okay, so we're going to move on now and talk about lipids. Okay, so for hyperlipidemia, the recommendation is to follow the TLC diet, and that's the therapeutic lifestyle changes. So what that means is first we wanted to maintain a healthy weight, and the way that we maintain healthy weight or we lose weight is we have to control calories. So we are going to talk a little bit about calories and how to control them so that we can work on weight. The next is to focus on the fat intake and the cholesterol. So we really want to try and get the calories down, related to how much fat is coming into our body. So you can see the percentages up there. The one we really want to pay attention to the most is the saturated fat, because that's what plugs up the arteries. So when Kathleen was sending around the test tubes and you saw all the fat in there simulated, that's the saturated fats. That's what we really want to try and stay away from. The monounsaturated, those are the healthier ones. Those are the ones that actually are good for your heart. They help to decrease the bad cholesterol and increase the good cholesterol. So those ones we want to get a little bit more of, and we're going to talk about what actual food products those are. Cholesterol, less than 200 milligrams per day, and that's one we just look right on the label and it'll tell us how many milligrams are in the products. Cholesterol is only found in animal products. So anything that's made from a plant will not have cholesterol in it, okay? Because cholesterol is made in our liver. Sodium, once again, we're paying attention to sodium with the lipids. We want to keep that below that 2,300 milligrams. And then plant sterols. Plant sterols are basically, they come from vegetables. They're extracts from vegetables, nuts, and seeds. And they are taken out of these foods and put into products for us to buy. So these are some examples of those products. There's an orange juice by Minute Maid. This is called Heartwise. That has plant sterol in it. The Smart Balance and the Promise Active. They used to have little active drinks. They're little shots. They still sell them on the internet, but they're pretty hard to find in the store. They now make it more of a spread like the Smart Balance. So you would just substitute the Smart Balance or the Active for your regular butter spread that you use in order to get the plant sterols and also to decrease on the saturated fat intake. The orange juice you want to be careful with because of the extra calories. So you just have to kind of balance that out. If you're a juice drinker, then you maybe want to switch your juice up, but careful about the portion size because this is our serving size for beverages, 8 ounces. Okay, so And then fiber. We definitely want to get that fiber intake because fiber actually binds to our bad cholesterol and removes it from our body through our waste products. So we're going to talk about some ways to increase fiber as well. So these are all the recommendations for hyperlipidemia. Don't get overwhelmed, please. We're going to take it slow. We want to make slow changes. Small goals. So by following the TLC diet, getting physical activity, and lowering your weight if you need to, or maintaining a healthy weight, we can see some pretty significant changes with that cholesterol, specifically the LDL cholesterol, that lousy, bad cholesterol. One thing to keep in mind, you guys, is that we can change as much as possible when it comes to our diet and exercise and weight, but sometimes genetics just overrides that. And so, you know, we try to use food first to prevent having to take medications, but you can do as much as you can, and then you may end up having to take those medications anyways. But we're going to try and make the diet changes first, if possible. Okay, so let's move on and talk about triglycerides. So when we're talking about triglycerides, the first thing that we really want to pay attention to is the fat content, the sugar content, and the alcohol content of our foods. These are the three things that are going to make a difference when it comes to lowering that triglyceride level. So sugars are found in our carbohydrate foods and basically candy, anything sweet that has sugar in it. Foods that are high in fat, which is similar to that hyperlipidemia, we want to try and get those fats down. And then in this situation with the triglycerides, we want to avoid alcohol altogether. So different from hypertension where we're limiting it, now we're just cutting it out completely because of that triglyceride level. Other things you can do, once again, maintain a healthy weight. Increase that physical activity, decreasing your use of tobacco products, and then controlling your blood sugar. Basically what that means is eating frequently throughout the day so you don't go long periods of time without eating. When we go long periods of time without eating, we get real high and lows in our blood sugar level, and that can affect our triglycerides overall. And then the last one is implementing a fish oil supplement. So taking 2 to 4 grams of fish oil per day has actually shown to decrease triglycerides by 50%. So it's a pretty big change that we can make just by doing that fish oil supplement. I did bring today, I'm going to send this around for you guys to look at. This just shows you what to look for when you're picking out supplements. You want to look for this specific emblem to be on the bottle. So I brought the bottle too so you can see what it's really little, what it actually looks like on the bottle. This is the United States Pharmacopoeia. They go around and look at our supplements to make sure that they are safe, because right now the FDA does not regulate anything that goes into supplements, and so we just want to make sure that the products that we're recommending for you, that you're choosing the ones that are safe. On the back side of this shows these are the only brands right now that are actually verified by US Pharmacopoeia. So I'm going to send this around so you guys can take a look at that. All right. Okay, so now we're going to move on, and we know now the nutrition goals that we're recommending, what we're looking for. Hopefully you have your lab numbers, you know which nutrition goals that you want to make according to those lab values. But in order to do that, we have to know how to read a food label, of course. So this is our nutrition facts label. Hopefully this is not the first time you've ever seen one of these. It's on all of our food products. And what do we look at first? Anybody know what's the first thing you should look at on the label? Yes, exactly. Serving size. So that's the first thing we want to pay attention to, because if we don't know the serving size, all the numbers underneath this, we can really, I shouldn't say they don't mean anything to you, but we could skew them. They could be ineffective for us if we don't know what that serving size is. So serving size first. So these are our crackers here, and the serving size for these crackers is 2, and there's 80 calories in these crackers. Why is it important to know that? Why do we want to know those calories? Yes, so if you know your calorie level for the day, then you can estimate how many of these crackers can I eat. How many of you guys sit down and eat 2 crackers? Anybody? Yeah, 2? Yeah, 10. Okay, so we used the example of 8, 320 calories in those 8 crackers. So it's just, we just wanted to put this slide in here to show you that it can add up quickly if we're not paying attention to that serving size and the calorie level. So we're going to talk, how do we do portions? So here's a couple different ways that we can do portioning to help you. Besides looking at the nutrition facts label and finding that portion on there, we can also use these methods. So we have measuring your food. So we talked about the food scales. You can also get measuring cups. Like I said before, it doesn't mean that you have to measure your foods forever, but it's a good place to start just to kind of evaluate what you're doing right now with your food, so you can visually see what it looks like maybe on your plates and your bowls at home. This is called the plate method. So this is a plate that they sell online. You can buy it if you would like. It's a little bit expensive. It doesn't go in the microwave, so it may not be the best option. But what this plate shows you is that you take your plate that is 7 inches in diameter. So you might want to take your plates out at home and see what size they are, because most of them are about 10 to 14 inches. So the plate method is based off of a 7-inch size plate. You take the plate and you split it in half. Half of it we do veggies, a quarter of it meat, a quarter of it grain. Then in addition to this, you can have a serving of either 8 ounces of milk, okay, a serving of fruit, which would look like this. These are blueberries, maybe a small orange, or a small dessert. So that would be what we call the plate method. Now, careful with that though, we can't stack that up to the ceiling, right? That would defeat the purpose. Okay. Desserts, this is a yo-yo. This shows you about the size of a cookie. Now, you can eat 2 of these, okay, 2 to 3, depending on the actual kind. That's the serving size, but it gives you that yo-yo as a visual cue. So that's the next one we're going to talk about. A way of portioning is using some of those visual cues. This one is a yo-yo. This one is a light bulb. Okay, so that's a broccoli spear, I guess you would say, and it's in the shape of the size of a light bulb. That would be your serving size for that. The orange that I picked up, this is a baseball or a tennis ball. That would be about the size for that orange. How many oranges and apples come in this size in the grocery store? You got to look for them. They're there, but you have to look for them. So that way you know if you do get a bigger one, then you'd count that as 2 fruits, 2 servings. Okay. Another thing we can use is the deck of cards. So this is for meat. So it kind of looks like a brownie, but it is actually it's supposed to be steak. This is a card that will give you the size of 3 ounces of meat, just like we talked about with that chicken breast. Okay, these are about the same size. For females, we can use the palm of our hand. Males, we can't do that. Hands are a little bit too big, so you got to have a female with you, or you can use the deck of cards as your visual cue. The other thing we can do, if you can look up on the screen, you can see there's a thumb. So a female thumb is a teaspoon. You times that by 3, that's equal to a tablespoon. So it's an easy way to do a visual cue with that. The other one we have is dice. That's for cheese. Okay, so there's 6 dice is equal to 1 ounce of cheese. Okay, so those are just some different ways when we're looking at portioning and how to do the portioning. The other thing is to buy some of those pre-portioned items. However, you got to be careful because sometimes they have added sodium because they're pre-packaged. So something to be aware of for that portioning. Okay, so back to our label. So we have our serving size. Now we're going to talk a little bit about calories because we've already identified that we need to know calories in order to maintain a healthy weight. So things to take into consideration is that, you know, sometimes we'll hear people say like, well, just get a kid's option or a kid's meal. That's not always your best. Unfortunately, they don't give the greatest food to our kids. So here are some things to keep in mind. Some of the kids' options actually are pretty high in calories. You can see the Ruby Tuesdays. These, you know, mini turkey minis and fries has 893 calories. So even though it may look like the portion size is smaller, because of the foods that they're offering, they still are high in calories, high in fat, saturated fat, cholesterol. So it's not always a good option to do those kids' portions. The other thing too that we have found, or that studies show, is that people actually underestimate their calories by 600 per day if they're not paying attention to the label and they're not getting those nutrition facts. And so that's one of the reasons that we encourage people to start a food diary and to start measuring your foods and looking at those labels for now, while you're trying to make changes. That's not a lifestyle thing you're going to do forever, but it at least gets you started and being able to try to make those changes. Okay, so how many calories do we need? These are some general recommendations for calorie level. Males and females, You know, it tells you for maintaining weight, losing weight, just depending on what your goal is and what you need to do, this is our general recommendation. We really don't want to go below the low end of those calories, because when we get too low, our body actually starts to go into starvation mode. And then instead of losing weight, anything we eat gets stored. And so that's why we don't drop those calories too low. For specific recommendations, you can go to mypyramid.gov and it'll give you a more specific plan according to your age, your height, your weight, your activity level, and that will give you more details. But these are just some general guidelines to start with. So 3,500 calories is equal to a pound. So what does that mean to us? How can we use that? We can look at it a few different ways. You can look at it as extra calories that lead to weight gain, but we can also look at it as ways to decrease calories to promote weight loss. And the way that we do that is we take 500 to 1,000 calories away each day. So 500 times 7 equals what? 3,500, which is 1 pound, right? So if we take 1,000 away, we times that by 7, that's 7,000 calories. That would be 2 pounds a week. And that's really what we're looking for healthy weight loss, is somewhere between 1 and 2 pounds per week. When we get above that and we start dropping 3, 4, 5, 10 pounds a week, we're going to start seeing loss in muscle and loss in fluid, and not necessarily body fat loss. And so we want to be careful with that. All right, so here's a little what we call wow factor to pay attention to for calories. First one is our Applebee's Blue Ribbon Brownie, 1,290 calories in that brownie. So what can we do with that brownie? Eat it. Well, it does sound like a good brownie. So what are some options? If we can stay away from it, that's the best option, right? But that's not always realistic. Sometimes we just need, you know, we got a sweet tooth. I have a sweet tooth. I need some sweets every once in a while. So we can definitely share with somebody, hopefully more than one person, because even eating half of it is 600 calories. So sharing it. A riblet meal with beans, coleslaw, and fry, 2,000 calories. That was equal to 11 hours of leaf raking. Do you guys have 11 hours to rake leaves in your day? Probably not. So it just goes, these are just to show you where, you know, the calories really can add up. The steak nachos, high calorie, high fat, 118 grams of fat. That's almost twice the amount of fat that you need in a day at the high end, okay? And then look at that sodium, 2,900 just for that meal alone. Cornbread from Boston Market, 180 calories and 12 grams of sugar. This one, honey barbecue ribs. So 1,000 calories, 65 grams of fat. That's how much is the high-end recommendation for fat per day, 65 grams for the whole day. So you're getting that in one meal. 4,400 milligrams of sodium. That's equal to 22 strips of bacon and 13 large order of French fries. So it's just to show you that we need to be educated. We need to know how to eat at restaurants. We need to get that information ahead of time so we can make good choices. I don't think it's realistic for me to stand up here and say, you can never eat out again. That's not going to happen. That is not going to happen in our society, where it's going to be very difficult to do. So we need to know how to handle that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on. So we have our serving size, we have our calories on our label. Now we want to look at the rest of the label, because this is important for you guys for disease reduction. So first we look at our yellow nutrients. These are the ones that we want to limit. So we already talked about the fat, the saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium. That's what you're going to look for on that label, is how to make sure you're getting low amounts of these. Sodium, what do we want to keep that at? What's our level of sodium per day?
2 grams.
Do you remember what we said at the beginning? You're close, 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams. So we want to keep it in milligrams because that's how it is on the label. Okay, that's what you're going to see on the label, is those milligrams. Okay, cholesterol, does anybody remember what do we want to keep cholesterol under?
Under 200.
Yep, 200 milligrams, good job. And then fat intake is going to be a percentage. So we're going to talk about percentages in just a few seconds. So the blue nutrients, these are the ones that we want to get enough of, because fiber is good for getting rid of that bad cholesterol, keeping us feeling full and satisfied so we're not overeating. Okay, helps with our digestion. And then those vitamins and minerals, we definitely want to make sure we're getting enough of those as well. Protein and carbohydrate, well, protein especially doesn't have a daily recommendation because everybody's protein needs are different. So you will never see a percentage next to protein, okay? Down here at the bottom, the footnote, I always tell everybody just to ignore that part because it's very specific to only people who are on certain calorie level. So you don't even need to look at that. It's just more confusing than it is worth paying attention to. All right, so we can use these percentages as a quick guide, a quick reference. So anything that has 5% or less is going to be low in that specific nutrient. Anything that has 20% or more is high in that nutrient. So what do we think about macaroni and cheese if we're looking at this label? What is our decision? From this label, we're looking at high fat, high cholesterol, high sodium, right? So that's where you use those percentages. The other thing you guys can do too is you can take your calories from fat and you can times that by 3. If you times that by 3 and it's higher than the calories per serving, that's a high fat product. Okay, so for this, see where it says 110 calories from fat? Do you see that number up here? Right up here? 110? Okay, you times that by 3, so that would be 330 calories. If that is higher than the calories per serving, so for this example it's 250, that's a high fat product because your calories are coming mainly from fat. Okay, so it's just a little trick that you can do with the label. All right, let's move on. So fats and cholesterols, these are the ones that we want to limit. So mainly we're looking at our meats, eggs, whole fat dairy products, specifically our organ meats are going to be high in cholesterol levels, whole fat dairy products, and then look at the different types of oils. Fried foods especially are going to be high in that saturated blood plugging fat. So the ones we really want to pay attention to are down below. Our seafood, walnuts, seeds, nuts, avocado. Those are going to be the healthier ones. Flaxseed, olive oil, olives. These are the ones we want to try and get more of. All right, so here are the 3 different types we talked about already. Saturated, we want to stay away from and avoid if at all possible. Polyunsaturated, these are ones that we call kind of like, okay, they do some good and they do some bad. So they're the ones that on occasion. These are the best ones over here, like we already mentioned. So if you're not cooking with olive oil, I would encourage you to start doing that as soon as possible. Anytime that you can substitute nuts or avocado for cheese or salad dressings, things that are higher in saturated fat, these are going to help by putting in some of those unsaturated. All right, carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are our main energy source. So carbohydrates, they kind of get a bad rap. They get kind of a negative name in our society, but they actually are good for your body. They give you good energy. However, we do want to choose wisely. We want to choose carbohydrates that are whole grains, that are high in fiber, so that we can keep that blood sugar stable over a period of time. So how do we increase that fiber intake? So these are some options. These are things that we're looking at. We're looking at increasing those fruits and vegetables, especially the ones with skins. If you can eat the skin, we want you to eat the skin. We don't expect you to eat a banana peel. But like, you know, apples, pears, they have skins. We want you to eat those skins. Adding beans to your food is a cheap, great way to get fiber. However, canned beans are high in sodium. So we have to be careful with that, trying to get some of the dried beans and cook them up. Fiber supplements, I have a couple up here on the screen. There's Benefiber, Citracell. There's a lot of different fiber supplements. I usually recommend the Benefiber because it does dissolve in pretty much anything except for beer. We found out from one of our classes, somebody tried to put it in beer and it foamed all over the place. So that, but other than that, you can't taste it. You can put it in a glass of water and you would never even know that it's there. So if you don't like fruits and vegetables, beans, if you know that you don't like anything that has fiber in it, you may want to try and do a fiber supplement. Oats, basically your oatmeal, oats, and flaxseed is a great way to increase as well. Does anybody know what flaxseed is? Ever heard of it? You know what it is? Kind of heard of it? Okay, so basically it's kind of like a big sesame seed. It's a little bit bigger than sesame seed. It's a darker color. You can find it in like the natural food section, or sometimes the bakery aisle, they'll have it as well. And you can add that to yogurt. You can put it in homemade breads, homemade muffins. You can put it on your cereal. Anything whole grain, we want to make sure it says whole grain on the label, not enriched. Anything that says enriched is not whole grain. So they'll try and kind of trick you by putting on the label like made with whole grain. That's not 100% whole grain. That means there's some whole grain in it, but it's not 100%. So that's what you're looking for on that label. And then high fiber, ready to eat cereals. Kashi, Fiber One, All Brand, these are real popular right now. And you'll see them around a lot, and they're basically, they are what they say. They are high in fiber, so they're good choices, but you have to also pay attention to some of those other nutrition facts that we are looking for as well. So those are ways to increase fiber. One thing just to be aware of is if you take a multivitamin, you want to make sure that you take that 1 hour before or 4 hours after you eat anything with fiber in it, because fiber will bind to that multivitamin and you won't absorb the multivitamin. So careful with the timing of that. All right, protein choices. Fish first, because fish is low in saturated fat, low in cholesterol, high in monounsaturated fat. However, we do want to be careful about shrimp, because shrimp is high in cholesterol. So we want to be careful about shrimp when you're choosing. Anything that is lean is usually a loin cut. So when you're picking out your pork, your red meats, loin cuts are going to be a leaner option. We really want to try and limit those red meats in general because they are higher in the saturated fat. So if you can get it down to 1 or less serving of red meat per week, that would be optimal. We had a guy tell us once that he ate 15 servings a week and he wasn't going to change it. So want to try and decrease that if we can and substitute with either vegetarian options, turkey options, soy proteins are going to be very healthy for the heart. However, you still have to be careful when we're looking at our turkey products because they're same as when we pick out ground beefs. We want to look for that percentage of fat because they can do the same thing. We want to look for the 96 or 97% lean ground beef or turkey product. So pay attention to that as well. All right, moving on to dairy. So 2 to 3 cups per day is the recommended serving of dairy, and we already talked about what that serving size looks like. So really on here we want to hit home trying to choose the lower fat dairy products and decreasing down from whole percent, 2%, 1% to skim when it comes to our milk. Cheeses, if we can get down to the 2%. I know the fat-free cheeses not taste very well, it doesn't melt, so I usually recommend soy cheese as an option for melting. Otherwise doing the lower fat cheese, it'll melt a little bit better. But the fat-free, it's just not going to melt, and it's probably not going to taste very good either. So those are some options. What we've done is we did a calculation where if you were to drink 3 glasses of milk a day, if you had whole milk, that would be 22 pounds of fat. So this right here, you guys, this is 5 pounds of fat. So if you switched from whole milk down to skim, you would save how many of these? If this is 5, 22. So that's about 4, a little over 4 of these each year of saturated. That's saturated fat. This is what goes in your arteries and clogs it up. Okay, so you can see 1% or 2% is 14 pounds per year. The 1% is 5 pounds, and then the skim is 0. So that just kind of shows you really a good tangible visual cue of what we can change when it comes to saturated fat just by making that switch. Some suggestions on how to make the switch if you're trying to go from 2% and down is just start doing a combination. Maybe you pour half the glass of 2%, half the glass of 1%, and then just go down from there, and your taste buds eventually will adjust to that. It takes about, I think they say 10 to 18 different times of exposure to foods for your taste buds to really accommodate for that taste preference change. So that is just, the recommendation when it comes to milk. The other thing you can try is, like I showed you before, the Smart Balance butter. They also have Smart Balance milk, sour cream, oil, peanut butter. So those are heart healthy options as well. And I believe that the Smart Balance milk it does have a creamier texture than the skim. All right, so let's talk about a sample eating schedule. This is really just to show you how to break down your calories, eat frequently throughout the day. This is mainly for when we're talking about the weight loss, also maintaining that blood sugar to help with the triglyceride level. So breakfast, most important meal of the day. We want to have that within 2 hours of waking up. helps get the metabolism going. It also helps to stimulate a hormone called leptin. Leptin is a hormone that actually helps you to eat more frequently through the day. Most people who skip breakfast in the morning, that hormone's not activated. So what do? They overeat at night because of that. So a lot of times people say, well, as soon as I eat breakfast, I'm hungry all day. That's okay. That's a good thing. That's your metabolism saying, hey, I'm working. I need food because I'm going to keep working throughout this day. So don't be afraid of that. Then at night, we get people who say, oh, I'm not going to eat after 7 p.m. because I had a friend who stopped eating at 7 and she lost 50 pounds. 7 p.m. has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the calorie level. She might have been a person who ate a lot of calories from 7 p.m. on until she went to bed. So there's no evidence that shows if you stop eating at a certain time, you'll lose weight. Now that doesn't mean if you get hungry at 8 o'clock, you order a large pizza, right? No. That means you have a small snack. It doesn't need to be, 400, 500, 600 calories, 100 to 200 to satisfy that hunger, keep that metabolism going through the night while you sleep. All right, moving on to restaurant. So eating out strategies. First and foremost, we want you to hopefully be educated to find those nutrition facts before you go. So if you can, if you know where you're going out to eat, get on the internet and figure out where you're going, what are the nutrition facts so you can make healthy choices. Sometimes we get to restaurants and we say, this looks like it's going to be a healthy option. We don't really know what's going into it. We get home and we look up the nutrition facts and it's totally different. So we have to be able to get that information ahead of time, okay? Request a low-fat cooking preparation, so be picky but nice about it because you don't want them spitting in your food, but ask nicely if they do have options for low-fat. What they've done, you guys, is a lot of restaurants found that anytime that they labeled the food low-fat, the people stopped choosing it because they thought it would taste gross. So they took off the apple or the heart that they put on the menu, but that product is still low-fat. It's still on the menu. So you just need to ask them if they have some options like that. Ask for whole grains, extra vegetables, have a fruit. Anytime we can substitute avocado for the cheese is great. Dressings. Order dressings on the side. Choose the smallest serving size if possible. Share with somebody. Limit the fast food and the fried food, baked goods, desserts, sharing foods, and then also just stopping when you're full. It sounds easy, but we don't do it. We don't pay attention to those hunger and fullness cues in our stomach. We sometimes eat with our eyes and our brain, more of stressful, emotional type eating. Anytime you're hungry up here, that's usually something going on that's not actual physical hunger. So paying attention to the hunger and the fullness in your stomach. So this is another slide that just talks quickly about how those calories can add up. Looking at Burger King, 1,500 calories if we're doing the regular or the large size with the Whopper, and then if we double that and increase it, it's 2,000 calories. So that's more than most people need in their whole day. So then what happens the rest of the day? They don't eat, they go long periods of time without eating, or they get too hungry and then overeat at another time, or they just eat their regular calories the rest of the day and they're up at 4,000 or 5,000 calories for the day. So it's something to pay attention to, is getting those nutrition facts so you can make good choices when you're eating out at restaurants. Okay, this is another wow fact for for sauces regarding nutrition facts. So for 1 tablespoon of a zesty onion sauce, it's 150 calories and 15 grams of fat. 2.5 is saturated. Ranch, 140 calories. So anytime when it comes to sauces and dressings, you guys, if we can choose an oil-based or like a vinaigrette, balsamic vinaigrette type based product, that's going to be lower in fat and calories. Any creamy type dressings are going to have that saturated fat in them. So these are just show you some of those calorie levels and how they change depending on what you're picking. The last one is McDonald's ranch dressing, and that's for the packet. This is not a tablespoon, it's the full packet, is 251 calories. So this is a place where we make mistakes because we think, oh, I'm getting a salad, I'm being healthy, or I'm being good. Well, when we add on the bacon bits and the cheese and the croutons and the salad dressing, you might as well just have got the hamburger and a small fry instead. So just to be aware of those sauces, condiments add up for calories, fat, but also sodium. A lot of our condiments are high in sodium. Okay, so keys to success. We want to make sure that you're getting that support and accountability. There's 2 different things. There's people in your life that are supportive and uplifting and help you with what you're trying to accomplish. And then there's other people that are more accountable, where they say, they may be a little bit mean, but it's mean in a good way. They're keeping you to that standard. They're not necessarily just there to listen and support, but they're really there to help you. And that may be more of a professional role, not necessarily a friend or a family member. The other thing too is that you may have those family members that sabotage you. Like, oh, you're trying to lose weight, and maybe they're trying to lose weight, but they want to lose more than you lose, so they're going to bring you cookies. So they may not be the ones you want to tell that you're trying to make nutrition changes to. So choose wisely of who you're going to use for your support and accountability. We really want to make those small goals, start with one at a time, and build off of that. So we talked about a lot of different nutrition changes, a lot of recommendations and changes. Start with today. Make one goal today before you leave this room of what you're going to try and change, and then eventually build from that. I think of it as a pearl necklace. One little pearl doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, right? But if you put all those pearls together, all those little goals together, it makes a beautiful necklace. Well, all your nutrition goals, your exercise goals, any of the goals that we talk about today or recommendations today will make you a beautiful, healthy person. And scheduling rewards, non-food rewards. Okay, we are famous for, oh, I've been doing so good, and so I'm gonna go out to eat. Or I'm gonna go get a birthday cake, or no, not birthday, but a celebration type meal. So we wanna stay away from that and choose things that will reward you, that are special to you, that really help you to feel more healthy and successful, but that are not food related, because we wanna make this a lifestyle. I went to this hypertension class and I made some changes, and I did that for about 4 weeks, and so I got a little healthier, so now what? Right? We got to make these lifestyle long-term changes. So we know we're creatures of habit, so take the information that you guys learned today and make that your habit. Build on the positives that you know about food, nutrition, exercise, stress management, and go forward from there. Start with keeping an honest food diary. People can keep food diaries, but they only write down what they think was good that they ate that day, right? So you have to be honest with yourself first and foremost, and then put that down on paper. Pay attention to those labels and don't expect immediate results. You didn't wake up this morning and go, oh my gosh, my lipids are high, or I have hypertension. It didn't happen from yesterday. It wasn't normal yesterday, and then all of a sudden today it's elevated. Same with your weight. You didn't wake up this morning and gain 20 pounds from yesterday to today, right? So you have to take it slow and look for those small changes. All right, last is we are going to be offering a more intensive class the first Thursday of the month. The first one is going to be July 1st. So if you would like to sign up for that, it's just basically nutrition specific to help with meal planning, sample menu ideas. We're going to go more in depth with actually looking at certain products and labels. So if you want more information, I don't know if you could want more information, but if you wanted to, I went over a lot today, but if you want more, that will be offered at that class.